And welcome back to my channel. Unless you're new here, then just welcome. My name is Rusty, and this is my channel where I talk about my favorite movies, mostly horror, and my favorite music, mostly metal. And we are going to kick off on ICU. Now, when I found out this was released, when somebody had picked it up and released it, I can't tell you how thrilled I was. I remember seeing it I remember seeing it when it was released, and I just really loved it. And so I'm very, very happy to have gotten it. Slipcase, brand new. Who did it? MVD Visuals. MVD Classics released a remastered version of it. This is Sylvester Stallone and ICU. This is his other slasher. I don't know about other people, but I consider Cobra and ICU to be slasher horror movies, and they definitely are. Cobra is definitely a slasher. I don't care what you say. And this is also a slasher. The deaths are completely slasherific. Is there any gun deaths? I think there might be a couple of gun deaths, but no. This is slasher shit. Guns, syringes, a snowplow. Yeah, it's a slasher. So, ICU was released in 2002, and it was directed by Jim Gillespie. It was written by Howard Swindle and Ron L. Brinkerhoff. It stars Sylvester. What a cast, okay? What a cast. It stars Sylvester Stallone, Charles S. Dutton, Polly Walker. If you don't know her, you must have never saw HBO's Rome. But Polly Walker, it's got Tom Berenger. It's got Patrick Flanery. No, is it Patrick Flanery or Sean S. Flanery? It's got Robert Patrick, the Flanery guy. And Kris Kristofferson is in it. It's a fantastic high name cast is in this movie. So it begins with a 911 call from some kind of seriously mentally deranged, as you can tell, male caller who is talking about how he's going to take or has been taking revenge on society and is going to continue to do so. And he's a serial killer who has switched to cops. So he's a serial killer who targets police officers. So we are then introduced to Detective Jake Malloy. Jake Malloy. He is an FBI detective. He used to be a regular cop. And we see him buying an engagement ring for his girlfriend. He's fixing to propose after a long relationship. He stops by a bar and talks to his cop friends, his little circle of, Leos that he knows. And they're talking about how there's been, this serial killer, he's killed 9 cops in the last 6 months. And Jake is one of the lead investigators on this. So the cops kind of rag him about, if it had been 9 FBI agents, y'all would have done something about it. People are going to be upset. So, and it's actually one of the guys from that bar, the cops from that bar, that's actually the next victim. And that was an ugly kill. I'll put it this way, you will never look through your peephole at the door again, because the cop goes home, somebody knocks on the door, he looks out the peephole, and it was a drill, and the guy like drilled him through the. Yeah, that's like, you definitely look out the window first, not your peephole. You won't look out your peephole after seeing this movie. Peepholes will be off limits after viewing this film. But, so he's called to the scene, of course, and the guy is like hogtied, but he's hogtied, hanging from the roof, hogtied. And his nightstick is jabbed all the way up to the hilt down his throat. And his eyes are like, oh yeah, it's a slasher. So, while he's at the scene, he gets a phone call. And they're like, it's for you somehow. How did he know, to ask for you? And he gets on there, and the guy is like, what do they call it, taunting him? Tells him over the phone that he is the cause of all of this because 4 years ago, he was on the case of a serial killer who was killing prostitutes, and that their investigation interrupted him and made his life hell, and that's what made him switch to killing police officers instead of prostitutes. So he's, kind of blaming him, and while he's got him on the phone, Jake ends up, so I just thought there was another scene, but I guess that's later. So he gives him some hints, and Jake ends up chasing him into this warehouse and finds his lair. And he finds, the guy shoots at him a couple of times. And he gets to the lair, and right when he gets in there, the guy's just hung himself. So, he's already like freaking upset. I'm missing a scene. Because, it was during, okay. How did I skip that? Excuse the interruption. I knew something was missing there. I just skipped over that whole thing. I didn't even write it in my notes. What the fuck? But while he's on the phone with him at that scene, he starts telling him that he's calling him. It was like that Seven. The movie Seven? It was that. Because he tells him that his girlfriend he's just done it to his girlfriend as well. And so when Sylvester Stallone, when Malloy gets to, he screams and everybody starts running to his house. And when he gets there, amazingly, because you didn't really expect that, but he did. He had killed her. He had done the same thing. He drilled her in the eye and then butchered her, and she's hanging from the roof as well. And so you can imagine he flips completely out. And with those hints, that's when we end up in the warehouse. We end up in the warehouse after that, and that's where he finds what supposedly is this guy, the killer, got away with it, by taking himself out. He had finally took himself out. So we flash forward then to 3 months later. And of course, Malloy has sank into an absolute drunken stupor. So his boss, his chief, Charles S. Dutton, convinces him to go to a new detox center that was made specifically for police officers, ran by police officers, for police officers to get over their trauma. So he does manage to get him to agree to go to that facility after he cuts his wrists. So he tries to commit suicide. Malloy does. And this was the final straw that the chief was able to convince him to go to this detox center. Now, this detox center, it's out in the middle of the mountains. It is the middle of winter. So it's, cold. It really turns in, it really reminded me a lot of The Thing at this point, because now the scene has shifted from LA to like Colorado or something in the high mountains. And or maybe it was the Sierras. I don't know where it was, but it seems like it was Colorado. But so the scene of the movie, location of the movie, switches from LA and the city to this remote, isolated, former military installation in the mountains in the dead of winter, which has now been taken and converted into this rehab center for cops. So he's there with like about 10 other patients, and that's where all of the big names come in. You'll recognize everybody. Like I said, Robert Patrick from Terminator. The whole cast is like well-known people. So he's introduced to all of these other patients, and you hear some really horrible stories, in like group therapy and stuff as they're doing this. But they start finding bodies. Not only do they start finding slasher-killed bodies, they're being picked off one by one, which is why I'm saying this is like a legit slasher. They're being picked off one by one in some pretty ugly ways. Axes to the head, and like Kris Kristofferson, he gets an axe in the head. And several of the others, like, at first they look like suicides. The first couple look like suicides. But it doesn't take Sylvester Stallone. It doesn't take Malloy and Polly Walker, who is the chief psychiatrist there. It doesn't take them long to figure out that something else is going on. And it isn't long before he realizes that that guy, the serial killer that he thought that he had trapped in the warehouse and that hung himself, that was obviously someone else that he had killed. And you can see, I guess, they didn't explain how he did it, but it's kind of obvious how he did it. Obviously, he had this cop, or this person. I don't think it wasn't necessarily a cop, but he had this person dressed up like him, in military gear, cop gear, standing on a chair. And then when he led Malloy into the warehouse, he then ran through that room and kicked that chair out, and that's why that guy was hanging there that he thought was the killer. But the killer actually got away, and he's followed him to this place, and he's picking off. So it becomes like a whodunit, right? So he's picking off all of these patients, and there's lots of them. Like I said, there's 10 or 12, and that doesn't include the staff, right? There's 4 or 5 staff members. So somebody there is picking off these people one by one in pretty brutal, slasherific ways. Jake begins to suspect, of course, that one of the group is the killer. So you have all of this, once again, like The Thing. Not only do you have all the snow and the snowstorm, but you have our collection of survivors, or not survivors, our collection of protagonists are all suspicious of each other. Like, who was the thing, right? Like, the way that they were all suspicious of each other. That's going on here, too. They're isolated. The cars have all been destroyed. Like, all the carburetors were messed up. It's a snowstorm, like the thing. So they're all trapped in this facility. They got no phone communication. They've got no way to leave. And they're trapped in the mountains with the serial killer who is picking them off one by one. So they mostly suspect Jack. I think that's Robert Patrick's character. No, that's Noah. Who is Jack? Jack was the, Jack was Tom Berenger's character. He was the orderly. He was one of the staff. And they suspect him of being it. Especially Noah. Noah, Robert Patrick's character, he's the asshole of the movie. I mean, he walks around like a person with a 2-inch dick who thinks it's 12 and a half. That's the way he walks around. And so he's always in conflict with the other patients and talking like a badass. So, like I said, all the vehicles have been disabled. More bodies, keep showing up. And then it all fucks up because Jack is one of the victims. They find him hanging from a tree. So, guess what? It's not Jack. So, Jake and Jenny, they lock everyone else up. There's like this shit. So you have Sylvester Stallone and Polly Walker. They like just put everybody into one like big room and lock them in. And it's like, we need to figure this out. One of you is a motherfucker. So we're going to cover our asses. We know it's not one of us. So, it could have been her, but there's just no way it could have been her. So, his suspicions are confirmed when he checks one of the victims, because he's like looking all over him, like for any clue. And she asked him, like, what are you doing? And he said, and he ends up like looking under his eyelids, and it says, I see you on his eyelids, underneath them. And that's when he knows that he was fooled 3.5 months ago. That serial killer is here, right? So it gets confirmed that it was not the serial killer who had hung himself, and that he had followed him to this detox center. So Jake then begins to think it's Slater, this guy named Slater. I can't remember his name. I could look, but I can't remember his name, but offhand. But I know him from a lot of British crime shows. I remember him in Cracker. I remember him in Prime Suspect. So I can't think of his name right offhand, but you'd recognize him. I mean, well, provided you're a cinema buff, you'll recognize him. So that's who he begins to suspect it is, and then he ends up proving that that's who it is. When he finds, he's a serial killer, right? So he takes trophies. So he finds the badges and IDs of the cops that he's killed, including the ones here, in his room. So now he knows that it's Slater. And they end up going after him, all the people that are left. There's a really interesting scene between Slater and Noah, because remember, Noah is the one that I told you was the toxic masculinity prick of the movie, right? Well, he ends up going and searching the basement with Slater. As we find out, Slater's the one that did it. And Noah, when he turns on Noah and is going to kill him, Noah becomes this, just as you would expect. he became the most bitch pussy you have ever seen in your life. He like starts crying and all kinds of shit. And then of course Slater kills him ugly. You have a big face off in the basement, especially when Jake finds Noah dead and mutilated, which is what he does. He mutilates and poses them like I explained in a couple of scenes. You know, the hog tied from the roof and shit. So it all ends up moving outside. Slater goes after Jenny. That's Polly Walker's character. And they end up going into like the storehouse. Jake ends up rescuing her though, right in the nick of time. There's a big boss fight showdown between them. And then Jake ends up killing him really ugly on a snowplow spike roller. That was an excellent scene because if you think of a snowplow, the big round thing that's like got all of these spikes all over it to cut the snow, right? So I'm not saying that that's what it's actually literally called, is a snowplow spike roller. I don't know if that's the technical term, but that's what I call it, and I just explained to you what it was. So if you happen to know what that actually is, you can put it in the comments, because to me, it's the snowplow spike roller. So, but like, right when he saves Jenny, and then he like, what's he do? He kicks him, because I mean Slater nearly kills his ass, and he ends up like kicking him onto that spike thing, and so he's got like some spikes sticking out of him, but he's still alive, and he says some ugly stuff to Sylvester Stallone's character, to Jake. He says some ugly stuff. And he says it like about his girlfriend, when he killed his girlfriend. He said something about, what did he say? Something about what she said, and that he was a pussy for not being there to protect her. In other words, he pushed his buttons like you wouldn't believe. And so Jake ends up like grabbing him and pulling him off the roller, and then he's so furious, he is so angry that all of that adrenaline's pumping, and he actually picks Slater up over his head like a barbell, and then like crashes him down on that spike roller again, but this time the long way. So he's like gets like 15 spikes through him. That was a really, really good scene. So he does that, and then as what few survivors there were, because Charles S. Dutton arrives right there at the end, because he found the body like a couple of days ago. He found the body of a cop floating in the frozen lake. So that led him to think that somebody up there at that detox place, but there's a snowstorm, right? How you gonna get to it? But somebody up there killed that cop and took his place, which is what Slater had done. Because remember, Slater was a patient. But Slater was never a cop. He was a serial killer. He had killed that cop, took that cop's identity, and went on to the detox center. And that's how he had snuck in amongst them. Charles S. Dutton had found that out, and that's the reason why he had taken a couple of days to get to the place, and shows up, well, right as the party's over. You know what I'm saying? And so Jenny lives through it. Jake lives through it. Charles S. Dutton, like I said, his character arrives and saves them. So it was only like a couple of them that lived through it. And did Tom Berenger's character live through it? I don't know. No, I don't think so. But so it was only a couple of people that lived through it. So it was a lot of bodies. there was a lot of good kills. And as he walks off, he had been wearing that engagement ring around his neck, and he hung it on a snow-covered branch of a tree. And then they walk off into the snow, going, getting out of there. So that was ICU. And as people know, if you hang around my channel, you learn things about me like I learn things about people on their channels. I am not a huge Sylvester Stallone fan. I love, but what movies I do love of his, I really, really, really love. When he's good, he's very, very good, And I don't hate Sylvester Stallone. I don't dislike it. It's just that I love The Expendables. I love Cobra. And Rambo. The Rambo franchise, like all 5 movies, which I've got over there. I would say that Rambo is like in my top 5 non-horror franchises of all time. So when I like Sylvester Stallone, I really like Sylvester Stallone. And he is excellent in this movie. He shows a lot of... one of the things I was impressed about Sylvester in this movie was that he cries and he tried to kill himself. In other words, he was tough, but he was real. And I really liked his character. I really liked Jake Malloy. He was... There was nothing toxic about his machismo. It was real. He was a real man. His girlfriend getting killed destroyed him. And he even tried to commit suicide, like I said. He was vulnerable. He cries in the movie. And yet, when he needs to be tough, he is a badass, what you expect of Sylvester. He was Rambo, when he needs to be in this movie. And he's a sensitive, normal guy, otherwise, who has real problems, and he didn't mind showing it. And since this was 2002, Sylvester is, this is one of those movies where Sylvester looked good. There were several times when I was like, he's cute in this movie, you know what I mean? Because anyway. So yeah, when Sylvester Stallone works me, he works me good. And I was so fucking glad to get ICU. So if you have not seen ICU, it is available. You can find it now. MVD Visual did a boutique release of it. So yeah, this is like a really hot, pleasurable item that I got. So I was really glad to get a hold of this. Get it while you can, because the price will only go up. But if you're a Sylvester Stallone fan, you should really check this out. If you don't have it, if you haven't seen it, you can get it, and it's definitely worth having. It's a beautiful transfer. The movie looks great. Sylvester looks great. The story is really good. It's simplistic, but then again, what slasher isn't simplistic? But he really worked the character very well, and I was really surprised at how authentic he played this character. He was a tough guy, but he was a real guy. It takes place at a detox center, for God's sakes. So, and I felt so bad for him. Like when his girlfriend got killed, and you saw him, he played it so real. There wasn't any fakeness about it. He was genuinely distraught and genuinely heartbroken. So, yeah, well, as you hear me praising it, I loved Sylvester Stallone in this movie, and I loved this character, and I loved this movie. and I really didn't know who the fuck what the killer was until we knew who the killer was. It's one of those where I did not figure it out before Jake. I figured it out with Jake's help. Jake figured it out, and I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't see that coming. Yeah. So, it didn't give away the mystery, so it kept you very interested in trying to figure out who it was. If you're a horror fan, this is definitely a horror movie. If you're a slasher fan, if you're into slasher horror, this is definitely a slasher horror movie. And just like Cobra is, well, actually, I think this is more of a slasher than Cobra, but Cobra is a slasher too. So, yeah, these are Sylvester's 2 slashers. So, yeah. I See You, Sylvester Stallone, 2002. Really, really loved it. And this, of course, is my kickoff, because next thing I'm going to be doing is the Rambo franchise. I'm going to do all 5 movies. I can't wait to watch them all back to back. It's been years and years, and I've been just holding on to that special 5 Blu-ray box set that I got to be able to sit back, enjoy it, and do it. So we will be doing Rambo 1 through 5 is my next project. So, love you, miss you, bye-bye. I see you. And I will see you in the next thing that I do. And, yeah. So, always remember, never forget, you're a very, very special person. I appreciate your time and putting up with me and my ranting. I love movies. I love cinema. And I fucking love horror. So, I just like to sit and talk about it. No purchase required. And he is really cute in this movie. I will see you when we go and pay a little spotlight love to Rambo. He's cute in Rambo too. I need to go.